Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A bit of Brexit blues there. Hopefully you'll be a bit more inspired further through. I can only imagine that standing on this stage is a little bit like being at Wembley Stadium on a micro version, but I assure you I am no Spice Girls reunion. Someone's laughing over there. I'm not going to go and don a Union Jack Jerry Halliwell dress. You're probably relieved by that. But I have got a presentation which is a little bit zigga-zigga. They're bad. They get worse, folks. But I do hope to take you on a path of self-discovery today. As the famous W.C. Fields once quoted, never work with children, animals, or anyone from the financial services industry. But I am going to try a little bit of an experiment today. It's the biggest room I've ever tried it with. So we'll see how this goes. It could be an absolute disaster. But for the purpose of this experiment, you will need the answer sheet that is on your desk in front of you. If you haven't got one, don't worry, you can just write it down on a piece of paper, because I will be asking you some questions. Let me introduce myself. My name's Andrew Robbins. I'm an investment specialist on the International Equity Group Behavioural Finance team. That flows off the tongue. Has anyone seen me present before? One person. OK, great. For that one person who has seen me present, my message over the last 3 years hasn't changed at all. That sounds quite boring. But actually, irrespective of what you read in the press, nothing has really changed. But I do believe that UK equities still offer an attractive investment opportunity at the current time. But I am naturally an optimist, and whilst you may not agree with everything I say, much like my wife, hopefully some of my arguments may resonate with you today, unlike my wife. But what has been happening in recent times?
Because Brexit means Brexit.
Now, this is currently our mantra, let's solve it. If you think I'm going to solve Brexit today, you've come to the wrong presentation, because I haven't got a clue how it's going to end. We currently have no leadership of the government. It seems that it is a badge of honour to have at least done some type of drugs in the past to actually get that post. But we'll see how that turns out. Now, we are on the path, or potentially on the path, to leaving the European Union. And I actually don't know what the fuss is about, because as you can see from this chart, it's a very simple process. But what I will say is at the current time, we are still here. Everyone's got a bit silent. And we yet have to go through all of this process. And the great thing is, ladies and gentlemen, we can actually go back to the very beginning. Now, I think it's important to give you an idea of the process we're going through, to go through each of these blocks one by one. No, I'm not going to do that. Not going to do that. But it is a very complex process. And the fact is that with Brexit, you are either absolutely delighted, although that is becoming less so at the moment, or you're pretty annoyed, pretty upset with the current status quo. And the problem with emotion, ladies and gentlemen, is it affects our decision-making processes and actually enlarges our innate human behavioural biases. So what are behavioural biases? Let's have a couple of examples. My wife refuses to wear a watch. And when she says she's going to meet me at a certain time, she normally says, I'm going to be 5 minutes late. How many people have done that? How many people have said they'll be 5 minutes late? And how many times are you 10, 15, 20 minutes late? We're overconfident that we'll actually achieve that 5-minute delay. Now, all of you look a very professional bunch, so this probably doesn't apply to you, but how many times have you been in a pub with your friends or colleagues and said, I'll have just one more? When is it ever just one more? It's normally 2, 3, or 4 more, not one more. And behavioural biases are tendencies to think in certain ways that can lead to systematic deviations from good judgment. So basically, we have these innate human behaviours, biases within our, or behaviours within our personal lives, within our human essence, that affect the decisions that we make. So what human behaviours are there? We've got anchoring. We've got herding. We've got overconfidence. And we've got loss aversion. So I'm going to talk about these not in the context of investment, but in the context of you as human beings. And this is your path to self-discovery, ladies and gentlemen. So let's start with anchoring. Now, true story, I talk about my wife a lot. She's a wonderful lady to put up with me, quite frankly. But she'd been a real support over the last 18 months through some difficult times. So I decided that I'd take her to Selfridges to buy a handbag. She said to me she'd never been to Selfridges. We actually met overseas. We moved to the UK back in 2010, and she'd never been to Selfridges. And her birthday was coming up on the 9th of February. My birthday's on the 2nd of September, so I can never forget a birthday, the 2nd of the 9th, the 9th of the 2nd. And I wanted to buy her something special, because she'd been a real support. So I decided I'd buy her a handbag, a designer handbag. Now, I have bought my wife what I thought was a designer handbag a few years ago, and it was Ted Baker. Now, when I look at, let's see, there's a lady there going, that's not a designer handbag. But I thought it was, more the fool me. Obviously, my wife has great insight because, obviously, Ted Baker had a bit of a shocker yesterday. But I had in my mind that a designer handbag costs £200. Oh, no. So we went up to London, up to Selfridges. We had a lovely lunch up there with the kids, and we went down to the handbag floor. Now, the first handbag my wife picked up was £3,000. So immediately, I'm anchored on a £200 handbag for a designer handbag, more the fool me. My wife is anchored to £3,000 as the cost of a designer handbag. Now, what is the real value of a handbag that my wife is going to put snacks for the kids, wipes in, etc.? I think it's £200. In fact, I think it's a Tesco's carrier bag. But she thinks it's £3,000. Is £800 the right value? Who knows? But both of us were anchored to different levels of the value of a handbag. Let's talk about herding. This is my favourite example because I can, again, bring this to my personal life. I'm sure a lot of us are going on holiday in the next couple of months. And let me put a scenario to you. You're taking your family or partners or friends down to the marina and you're going for dinner. And you have two choices, two restaurants to choose from. You've got the one on the left, which is empty, or the one on the right that is full. Who would go to the full restaurant? A few of you. Who would go to the empty restaurant? About 3 of you. And most of you wouldn't eat. Incredible, you're so healthy. Well, actually, in real life, most of us would go to the full restaurant because we exhibit a behaviour called herding. We believe that they can't all be wrong. But actually, how many times have we been on holiday and we've come back and said to our friends, do you know what, I found this lovely restaurant in the middle of nowhere, run by a family, it was empty, we had a lock-in, they gave us free drinks. How many times have we had that? None of you. I do not believe you. And I've actually got a personal experience of this. So we're one of those boring British families that go to the same place on holiday every year. Has anyone been to Holiday Village Roads? I don't blame you. Holiday Village Roads is an all-inclusive venue where basically you can drink as much as you want, eat as much as you want, and you do because you want to get your money's worth, and we go there every year. Now, the interesting thing about this place is I'm very out of place when I go there because I'm literally the only person there without a tattoo. Even my wife has a tattoo. Obviously, the kids don't. They're 9, 11, so they don't have tattoos, but I'm literally the only person without a tattoo. And in the evenings, the bar is absolutely rammed. And I said to my wife one night, I'm fed up with this. Let's go and find somewhere else. I can't stand the screaming kids. We obviously had to take ours with us. But fed up with the screaming kids, I want to find somewhere quiet. And we found this bar run by a lady called Betty. And the kids, the wife and I, we played games of cards. We had a lovely time, a really nice family time. And in fact, if you Google Queen Betty, Holiday Village Roads, you'll find a cocktail named after Betty. But please, when you put this in Google, make sure you include Holiday Village Roads, because when you put Queen Betty in there on its own, some really weird stuff comes up. But Holiday Village Roads, Queen Betty, and if you are ever in Rhodes, go to that bar. She's a lovely lady. In fact, she cried when we left. I don't know whether that's from relief or the fact she was depressed to see us go, but she cried when we left. And do try it. Now, disclaimer, we work in the financial service industry. There could be a very valid reason that restaurant is empty. It could have given loads of people food poisoning the night before. So disclaimer, I take no responsibility if it turns out badly, but I would recommend try and find those out-of-way restaurants. Don't follow the herd. Overconfidence. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is where your participation is going to be required. Are we as good as we think we are? Well, let's look at some surveys. Student drivers in the US, a study was done, and 93% of them thought they were better than average drivers. In France, 84% of French men thought they were better than average lovers. So if you ever come across a French man studying to drive in the US, he is immense. But actually, the real figure should be about 50%. But human beings, we have this belief that we are better. We're overconfident. We're better than we actually are. So let's see if there's some overconfidence in this room. Telephones are not allowed, ladies and gentlemen. That'll defeat the purpose of this quiz. But I have a quiz for you. And I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'd like you to put a low and high limit with a 90% confidence level that your answer falls between those. Not 100%, but a 90% confidence level that the answer fits between the low and high range. So let's start with the first question. Martin Luther King's age at death. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not expect you to put between 0 and 100. That is not playing the game. But I'd like you to put the low and high range that you think, with 90% confidence, Martin Luther King's age of death was. Now, I have to rattle through this because I'm conscious of time. Next one, number of countries that are members of OPEC. Number of countries that are members of OPEC. The length of the Nile River in miles. Now, just for those metric people out there, we've got 1 kilometre equals 0.62 miles. But if you could put your answer in miles, because I can't do that conversion. I might work in the financial industry, but my maths isn't that good. The number of books in the Old Testament. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, 90% confidence level. I do not want to see 0 to 1,000 under that question. It's not playing the game. The diameter of the moon in miles. I can almost hear you all thinking. The weight of an empty Airbus A380 in pounds. Now, 1 pound is 0.45 kilograms. And the Airbus A380, if you're not aware, ladies and gentlemen, is that double-decker Airbus plane. They're absolutely fantastic. I've travelled on it a couple of times when I lived overseas. A great plane. Unfortunately, it looks like they're not going to make those much longer. The year in which Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was born. The gestation period in months of a giraffe. God, everyone's taking this very seriously. The air distance from London to Santiago in Chile in miles. And finally, the deepest known point in the oceans in feet. And 1 foot is 0.3 metres. Now, I'll give you a few seconds just to finish off your answers. I'm not going to treat you as I was at school and ask you to swap your papers with your neighbour. I'm sure we're all very honest people in here. OK, let's move on to the answers then. So, Martin Luther King's age at death was 39. There's a couple of people very pleased themselves already. The number of countries that are members of OPEC is 14. The length of the Nile River in miles is 4,132 miles. I think some of you are very good at poker, because your faces aren't giving a lot away. or you got them all wrong so far. The number of books in the Old Testament. Now, I didn't know this, but there's actually two answers, and I will accept either. 39 if you're Protestant, 46 if you're Catholic. Did anyone else know that? There were two? No, I didn't know that. The diameter of the moon in miles is 2,159. The weight of an empty Airbus A380, for some reason the font has enlarged, so obviously a very big plane, 795,869. The year in which Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was born was 1756. The gestation period in months of a giraffe is between 14 and 15 months. The air distance from London to Santiago in Chile in miles is 7,264. And finally, the deepest known point in the oceans in feet is 36,070. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to tot up your scores out of 10. I won't give you too long for that. I think we can all probably get to 10 quite quickly. OK, who got 10 out of 10? No one? 9? 9? Liars. 8? OK. 7? 6? 5? 4? There we go. 3? 2? Below 2? Yes, OK. Now, actually, if you look at statistics, you should have got 9 out of 10 right. But we have overconfidence that we know the answer to these things. Now, actually, the range you could be given could be anything to give you that sort of confidence of 90%. But we were overconfident that our boundaries were the boundaries in which the answer would lie. We are overconfident as human beings. And in fact, they've done some studies, particularly at the races, horse racing, on this. And although you might have more pieces of information regarding how you gamble, the accuracy actually doesn't change a lot. But your confidence increases. And it's not how many pieces of information you have, and I'll talk about this in a second. It's actually what information are you looking at. That's the important thing. And let's talk about loss aversion. Again, a personal example of this. I was taking my kids for a bike ride. I know even someone of my bodily form does do a little bit of exercise. Taking the kids for a bike ride last year. And the little place we go, there's a little cafe, and I was going to get the kids a couple of ice creams. And I thought I had £10 in my wallet. In fact, I knew I had £10 in my wallet. And yet I came down in the morning, my wife had gone out, and that £10 has miraculously disappeared. And I was more annoyed about not having that £10 than I would have been overjoyed at finding an extra £5 in there. As human beings, we hate to lose money more than we like to gain money. Now, there are two subsectors of society where that doesn't actually ring true. And two subsectors of society where actually they reward themselves for not doing as badly as they could have done. And they are pathological gamblers and alcoholics. We've obviously got a couple in today. But pathological gamblers and alcoholics will actually reward themselves for not doing as badly as they could have done. OK, so let's talk about these behaviours in the investment world. We all work in the financial service industry. Let's talk about these in the investment world. And let's start with anchoring. If you buy a share at £1.50 and it goes down to £1, you'd be pretty annoyed, wouldn't you? Or would you be delighted in the current time? I don't know. But you'd be pretty annoyed. If you bought the same share at 50p and it went to £1, you'd be pretty happy with yourself. So let's take the emotional roller coaster of a share price. If you bought a share at £1 and it went to £1.50, you'd be pretty happy with yourself, wouldn't you? Pretty happy. But what if it dipped down back to £1.20? You'd think, why didn't I sell there? I know we shouldn't, but how many times do we look at our pensions on a daily basis and think, oh, I should have sold yesterday? But if that share price then rallied up to £1.80, you think, oh, I'm really pleased I stayed in, wouldn't you? What if it rocketed up to there? Would you sell out? Who'd sell out there? No one? You wish you would have done if it didn't done that. But then if you sold out there, it went up to there. It's a massive emotional roller coaster looking at just the share price, isn't it? It's very difficult to keep our views in check. If you looked at that one piece of information, this goes back to the gambling analogy at the horse race. If you looked at this one piece of information, it's very difficult to make a decision. But what drives share prices? Well, what drives share prices is earnings growth. And if you had another company, let's say, and this was the earnings profile, and you saw that, you'd be pretty confident this company can do well, that the management teams are doing the right thing, and they can generate earnings. If it continued its rise up, you'd have even more confidence this company's doing the right thing. And if it continued that path up, continually growing their earnings, you'd have quite a bit of comfort there, wouldn't you? Be happy with that. Well, actually, these charts from the same company, Fevertree. Has everyone heard of Fevertree? Yeah, unless you've been hidden under a rock, you probably have heard of Fevertree. Great company. And if you look at them over the long term, look what that company has delivered. A great company that I think had a stroke of genius by putting their mixers on British Airways. Has anyone had a gin and tonic on a British Airways flight? None of you drink on a British Airways flight. I don't believe you. But if you put your mixers on a British Airways flight, you've suddenly got a marketplace across the globe of people who are trying your products. And Fevertree is continually growing. Great company. Now let's take two together. Anchoring, herding. I've talked about anchoring in our private lives and also with the share prices. But let's talk about herding as well. So how do we in our behavioural finance team exploit these human behaviours that are in the marketplace? Well, we use a lot of information from the sell-side analyst community. So let's say a company releases its results, and the sell-side analyst community reckons that the company can do between 100 and 105 million of earnings over the next 12 months. But there's one sell-side analyst, let's call him Bob. And Bob gets a phone call, and he finds out that this company has just taken delivery of a bit of kit that it can increase its productivity fivefold in a product that is really in demand. And he reckons that that company can now do 120 million of earnings. But does he put his report out stating this company can do 120 million of earnings? No. Because if he gets that wrong, he will look like an idiot. And believe it or not, most people in the world do not want to look like idiots. But there's a bigger problem for Bob. If he continually gets it wrong, he will likely get the sack. So what does he do? Self-preservation. He puts his report out there stating that this company could do 108 million of earnings. Because if they do 108, 109, 110, he's still going to look the closest in the sell-side community. He'll look like a genius, he'll get the big bonus, carried on the shoulders of his colleagues around the office. But he's not taking the risk of putting the full figures out there. He also has comfort that when a company puts out a positive earnings announcement, 7 out of 10 times, the next announcement will be a positive earnings announcement. And it works on the reverse as well. So if there's a negative earnings announcement out there, 7 out of 10 times, the next announcement will be a negative earnings announcement. And we can exploit this because Bob will use language in his initial report, such as, I've been conservative with my estimates. And if we hear language like that, what we do is we get on the phone to Bob and say, why are you being conservative? What assumptions are you using? And in fact, we're building systems within our team to actually efficiently look through these sell-side analyst reports so we can cling on to these phrases and work out very quickly whether we feel they're being conservative with their estimates. Overconfidence. Overconfidence is really often seen in management teams of companies. So has everyone heard of Tesco's? Okay, Tesco's, a really good grocers. But what has happened to the company's share price when the old management team thought because they were good grocers, they were good at banking, insurance, mobile phones? Companies can diversify, but don't lose sight of the core business that you're good at. And as a result of them diversifying into areas that they're not particularly well known for and into countries they don't know, their share price has pretty much gone sideways. So, what I do strongly believe is that you need to focus on your fundamentals. Focus on things such as earnings growth for companies. Don't get tied up into emotional roller coasters by looking just at a share price. A share price is a good indicator, but don't just look at the share price on its own. If you look at things like the share price and the earnings growth together, you come across companies like Games Workshop. Does anyone here play Warhammer? You're never going to... Oh, there is someone. There's someone who... Warhammer. Has everyone heard of Warhammer? Yeah? There's lots of people in the world who are playing with figurines behind closed doors. It is massively popular. The gentleman over there can tell you all about it, I'm sure. This company in the small and mid-cap space, we actually went to, one of our guys on our desk went to visit it. It only has actually one sell-side analyst, or did only have one sell-side analyst covering this company. And this sell-side analyst continually upgraded the expectations. Also, when our team went up to see the company, they found out that they were increasing their manufacturing area by double. This is a company in a really niche part of the market that is doing incredibly well and consistently beating expectations, way ahead of what the analyst community thinks it can do. And as a result, the share price has this upwards trajectory. Now, another company, Metro Bank. Anyone heard of Metro Bank? Been in the news a little bit recently, hasn't it? This is a company where the founder, Vernon Hill, paid his wife, or his wife's company, £21 million to come up with the design for Metro Bank. Now, Vernon Hill has a couple of other banks, mainly in the US. Has anyone seen the design of the banks he has in the US? No? Google it. And you spot the difference between that and Metro Bank. They've changed the name, red letter first, same design afterwards, and to come up with the UK design, £21 million. Now, we haven't liked this company from the very beginning, and let's look at where we are now with Metro Bank. They're being investigated for securities fraud, and they've got £900 million debt book that they've put as less risky than it actually is. And yet the earnings expectations at the beginning were very high, and the share price caught up with that. In one of our strategies, we shorted it many, many months ago. Other strategies, we were underweight. And look what's happened to that earnings expectation, steadily gone down. That served us incredibly well. And actually, in this process, the process that we use, we can actually identify both those companies that can do very well and those companies that can struggle. So the best scoring stocks in our behavioural finance process have delivered 10.4% annualised returns since our process came into fruition back in the mid-90s. And this is where most fund managers spend their time. They want to find these companies that can do really well. But, ladies and gentlemen, what I do strongly believe is by reducing your exposure to these companies that we think are going to struggle, you can actually generate more alpha. So our lowest scoring stocks in our universe, and we cover the whole of the UK equity market, about 600 to 700 stocks, have delivered minus 13.9% returns. So whilst it is important to get maximum exposure to these companies, it is also important to get as little exposure to these companies as possible. So how do we do that? I'm going to very briefly talk about two ways of doing it. If you want more information, I'll be on the stand over lunch and in the breaks. But JPM UK Equity Core Fund, we take marginal overweights and underweights depending on whether we like the company or not. Not taking risk at the sector level. And we've got an extension strategy, active extension, where it's a 130-30 active extension strategy where we can actually short companies we don't like. So in this example, JD Sports versus Sports Direct International. And the problem with the UK equity market is that there is a long tail of tiny constituents in the FTSE All-Share. Does anyone here know how many stocks in the FTSE All-Share are above 1% of the index? Anyone want to take a guess? 30, close, 20. So 20 stocks out of the 640-odd stocks in the FTSE All-Share are greater than 1%. So if you really don't like a company, If you've really got negative conviction about a company and it's 3 basis points of the market, all you can do is not own 3 basis points, and that's not going to do anything for your alpha. However, if you can short that company, like with Metro Bank, you can do very well. Now, what I will tell you is a few things that I believe about the UK equity market and why I think it's attractive at the current time. Confucius said, true wisdom is knowing what you don't know. And there's lots of things I don't know, ladies and gentlemen, lots of things. But regarding the UK equity market, there are 3 things that I do know. First of all, if you compare the yield in UK equities with the yield in UK gilts, there has not been wider dispersion since the First and Second World Wars. I do not think we're in a Third World War situation. Although some of you might feel terrible about Brexit, I don't think we're entering into war. From a valuation standpoint, we're almost at 30-year lows. The UK equity market, for a long period of time, has not been as cheap as it is. And when you look at the M&A activity in Europe, corporates realise this, so they've been buying up UK businesses like they've been going out of fashion. The next biggest market is Germany, which is only about 1/3 of the M&A activity that's been going on since the UK referendum. But investors in UK equities have shied away. People are buying up our businesses, ladies and gentlemen. The UK equity market, I'm sure you all know this, but is a very global market. So only about just under 30% of revenues come from the domestic market. But the great thing about investing in UK equities and getting exposure to the global market is we really do underappreciate the transparency of companies listed in the UK. I've lived in the Middle East, ladies and gentlemen, and let me tell you, when those companies release their results, a lot of times they're more fictional than Peter Pan. A UK-listed company has strict regulations around how they release their results and how they calculate them. And finally, they're chucking out a decent dividend yield. Yes, you can get high yields in Russia, but I do think there's a slight risk premium to that, ladies and gentlemen. You can get a really decent yield. It's one of the highest yielding developed markets in the world at the current time. So why is income important? Well, if you invested £100 back in 1899 and looked at the returns in 2015, without investing the income, you would have made yourself about £184, ladies and gentlemen. Not bad returns. Now, please note the scaling is now going to change. If you reinvested your income, you'd be on about £28,000, ladies and gentlemen. So income is important. Also, let's look at how long people are living. Judging by the way I've led my life, I haven't got much longer on this planet. I'm closer to death than I was birth, and closer to the end of my career than the beginning of my career. But people born in 2066, 50% of the population will live to their 100. And let's be honest, I look at the elderly today. My parents are a lot more active than my grandparents were. They want to live life. They don't want to sit at home or sit in a care home. They want to live life, and sometimes disgracefully. Now, we've got a range of UK equity funds. I've talked about Core and Plus. We've got a number of UK equity funds. Please do have a word with me on the stand outside if you're interested in chatting more about UK equities in general or any of our funds. But I will just leave you with a few last comments. Brexit concerns are actually creating a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity. Who would have thought we'd be 25% up in UK equities since the referendum? I think at the time you would have thought it would be the end of the world. It's not. But focus on the fundamentals. To make the correct investment decisions, focus on the fundamentals, focus on the stocks you're buying, and underexpose yourself to those companies you think will struggle. And if you do that, you should weather, over a period of time, any storms that you face and deliver some consistent performance. And just some final thoughts from me, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.